Welcome to Reinventing-U. I'm your host, Danielle Silverman. I believe that in today's world of ever-constant evolution, the only career change that matters is when what you do matches who you are and what you believe. This show is where you'll learn how embracing change and reinventing yourself will help you navigate any disruptions and lead a life of happiness and fulfillment, especially in this ever-changing world. Your purpose and your meaning will drive your personal transformation. As I like to say, it's your vision, your life. Be passionate about it. Reinventing-U starts now. Jeff Bezos, CEO of Amazon, once famously said, "Your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room." Anyone who has studied marketing knows the importance of a brand. Coca Cola is a brand, Apple is a brand, Nike is a brand. When we hear the names, we see their logos, we recognize immediately what each one stands for. Have you thought about what you stand for? Who you are, and more precisely, what your brand is? Hello, everybody. My name is Danielle Silverman, and you're listening to Reinventing-U on Transformation Talk Radio. Today, we're talking about personal branding and why it's so important for your career reinvention. I was recently introduced to Ash Ambridge. She's a woman who grew up poor in a trailer park in Pennsylvania. And in her senior year of high school, the billionaire and founder of Monster.com showed up to offer a fully paid scholarship to a college. And this was offered to all seniors in the high school. But in order to qualify, one had to demonstrate financial need, first of all, which Ash had no problem doing, and also entrepreneurial spirit. And as part of the interview process, students were instructed to bring a tangible object that would demonstrate their entrepreneurial spirit. Ash had absolutely no idea what that meant, but she looked it up and she thought long and hard about what kind of object she could possibly bring. So she ended up creating a hexagon-shaped box. And each side of the box illustrated things that she'd done in her life up until then, and things that she thought demonstrated her leadership in some kind of way. So during the interview, she put the box on the table and she opened each side of the hexagon. And from there, she brought out another little hexagon box. And in that little hexagon box was one thing, one of the things that she talked about that to demonstrate her leadership. And when she was done, she looked up and she said, "But none of this is what makes me a future entrepreneur." And then she reached for the smallest box inside the bigger box, the one that was at the center. And she removed it and she put it on the desk. And then she lifted the lid. "This does," she said, indicating this is what makes me a future entrepreneur. And inside that box was a little red heart, the tangible object that no one could see, but that was very, very real. You can read this story on Ash's website. It's called The Middle Finger Project. Love the name. Her whole life is a beautiful example of what personal branding can do. And it's also a beautiful example of what it means to reinvent yourself. So what is personal branding and why is it important? Well, in 1997, Tom Peters, you might know him as the man who wrote the famous management book, In Search of Excellence. That's the book that actually propelled him into the world as a leading management guru. Well, in 1997, he wrote an article that appeared in Fast Company magazine. And that article was called The Brand Called You. And lo and behold, personal branding was born. Actually, he wasn't the first to talk about personal branding. Napoleon Hill, back in the 1930s, in his, what's the name of his book? Think and Grow Rich, I think is what it was called. He spoke about personal branding then too, but it took off very, very slowly. And it wasn't until Tom Peters wrote this article, and then the book, The Brand Called You, the article was called The Brand Called You, but a couple of years later, he wrote a book called Brand U50, not age 50, but Reinventing Work, 50 Ways to Transform Yourself from an Employee into a brand that shouts distinction, commitment, and passion, exclamation mark. And I point that out, that exclamation mark, because that exclamation mark has become Tom Peters' brand. In the cover, he dedicated the book to MJ, Oprah, and Martha, inventors of the modern brand you. And then he added, for the 1 in 100,000 who doesn't get it, Jordan, Winfrey, and Stewart. Real brands don't need full names. He was referring, of course, to Michael Jordan, Oprah Winfrey, and Martha Stewart. Martha Stewart actually was famously known to have said that there was a point in her life when she realized that she was no longer a person, but a brand. But my favorite quote comes from the artist and singer Janis Joplin, who said, "Don't compromise yourself, honey. You're all you've got." So what is personal branding? It's a process of building and promoting your public image, your reputation, your unique personal attributes. And it involves intentionally presenting yourself in a way that aligns with your goals, your values, and your areas of expertise. It does not mean promoting yourself shamelessly by, quote unquote, sucking up to people. But it is a way of presenting yourself, of promoting yourself in an ethical way and in an authentic way. I'll come back to that word very often during our time together. Do you remember what Juliet said to Romeo? What's in a name? That which we call rose, by any other name, would smell as sweet. In fact, what Juliet is saying is, hey, Romeo, I love you, not your name. Names aren't even all that important anyway. We could change your name to, from Rose to, I don't know, Rotten Egg Surprise, and the rose would still smell good. So who cares? Well, you should care, because a Rotten Egg Surprise immediately brings to mind a certain image, and that image is not pleasant. It's not nice. In fact, it's downright disgusting. So what you call yourself, the words you use, how you present yourself, all of that is important because it illustrates who you are. And it tells people what you stand for, what's important to you, and why. Words and pictures tell a story. I read earlier today that job cuts are up nearly 400% this year, approaching levels that we haven't seen since the early pandemic in 2020. Tech layoffs are at the top of the bunch. They represent 38% of all job cuts, the hardest hit sector. And the financial industry is probably next at about 11%. I'm not saying this to scare you. And I certainly don't want to dwell on the negative. On the contrary, today, personal branding is a subject that I want you to take seriously, but in a positive way. There are still lots of jobs out there. But the point here is, how do you differentiate yourself? I'm having trouble talking today, so you'll have to forgive me. How do you differentiate yourself? How do you distinguish yourself and stand out from the crowd? And as you can imagine, this is made particularly relevant today. With so much being posted on social media, you have to work doubly hard, or even more than that, just to be seen and to be heard. Try, I don't know, launching a course on social media with so many people doing the same thing. Why would anybody notice what one particular person is doing versus another? And personal branding is more relevant today than it ever was. In fact, there are several things today that are important to understand how personal branding is different today from what it used to be when we first started talking about it. One of the biggest differences is the role that social media plays in personal branding. Today, we have access to a wide range of social media platforms like LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, you name it, there are others as well. All of these allow us to connect with others, to share our thoughts and our ideas, and to build a following. That means that personal branding today is more about creating an online presence that reflects who you are and what you stand for, rather than simply creating a polished resume or an elevator pitch. It's really important that your image on social media also reflect what is on your resume or in your elevator pitch. It needs to be consistent across all of the communications that you use. Another thing that's more relevant today, more relevant to personal branding because of the world we live in today, is the changing nature of work. The job market is more dynamic and more unpredictable than ever before. I've said it many, many times before. The world is changing extremely fast, and it's very difficult to keep up. So we have to constantly learn how to change and what it is that's important to us to change that will work for us. Many more people today are freelancers or consultants, entrepreneurs, or have jobs that didn't even exist a decade ago. So personal branding today is less about conforming to a particular industry or a job role, but it's more about highlighting your unique skills, your values, and your experience. Another reason personal branding today is different. Well, I would say that it's not different, it isn't different today than what it was before. But I think the online world is making it more relevant or more important to notice, and that is the importance of authenticity. Authenticity is personal branding 101. Because today people are more skeptical than ever before, and they can tell when you're being insincere or not authentic. So it's less about creating a false image of yourself. In fact, you cannot create a false image of yourself without running into trouble somewhere. If you remember, not so long ago, there was a politician in New York who stated many, many things on his resume, including volunteerism and an MBA and all kinds of things that he actually didn't have. So when people started looking into his background, they realized that everything that he had been saying about himself was false. Everything that he'd been putting out there was false. Personal branding is about authenticity. It's about being true to who you are as a person. And it's the key in today's personal branding landscape, if you will. It's important to be transparent and genuine when you talk about yourself. And the last thing I'd like to point out in terms of what is the relevance of personal branding today versus what it was before. Well, I've already said that today's job market is extremely different than what it used to be. It's more competitive than it has ever been. So it is absolutely essential for you to differentiate yourself from other job candidates. I know I've said this before. I need to repeat it. There is a need to differentiate. So personal branding is not about conforming to a certain mold, but it's about highlighting your unique strengths and values. And I will say this in different ways at different times. It keeps coming back. You need to create a personal brand that sets you apart from other people, because that will increase your chances of succeeding in today's competitive job market. So how do you start doing that? Excuse me. Well, around 2005, I started studying with a gentleman by the name of William Arruda. William Arruda is a pioneer on the subject of personal branding. His latest book is called Digital You, Real Personal Branding in the Virtual Age. And I'll just show it to you, highlighted here. I highly recommend it as reading. I think it's a must read for everybody. And he states up front, he says, personal branding has changed. But like anything in life, he says, personal branding is dead. Long live personal branding. Your personal brand is your most valuable asset. So it's vitally important that you know how to develop it, how to express it, and how to continue to make it relevant and sustainable going forward. I'm going to share with you some of the gems that I picked up from William's book, because honestly, I couldn't have said things better myself. First of all, you need to figure out who is the real you. I've been saying this on my podcasts from the very beginning. You have to do work that matches who you are. So it stands to reason that it's important to know who you are. Ask yourself, what makes you, you? What makes you, you? What are your top values? Your operating principles. I have a colleague who calls them her guiding principles, things that she lives by. What are the things that are non-negotiable for you? What are some of the what are your top values? What are your guiding principles? If you don't know how to go about figuring that out, you can go online. There are a couple of very good resources. There's a site called viacharacter.org. Talks about discovering your strengths, your character strengths. And then there's another, I'm sure there are many, but the ones I look at are the Via Character Strengths and the Barrett Values Model, and that's at valuescentre.com. Center spelled the European way, CENTRE.com. Ask yourself, what's your superpower? What's the thing you do better than anybody else? What's your superpower? What gives you energy? What makes you want to get out of bed in the morning? What are your true passions? These are the things you need to know about yourself. And also, what's your motivation? In other words, why do you do what you do? This is also key to discovering your brand. Do you remember the Jeff Bezos quote that I started with? Personal branding is what people say about you when you're not in the room. So personal branding is also very much about perception. Perception is in part ability to build relationships. It's about being clear and consistent in your messaging and in the image that you project. And it's about the messages you give to others and the words that you use to describe yourself, both in person and online, and building those relationships over time. Again, it is above all about authenticity. You need to tell you'll need to tell people about who you are. You'll need to do that in person, as I said, and you'll also need to do it on social media. As a matter of fact, in his book, Digital-U, William Arruda provides an exercise, which I think is fascinating, to help you figure out your skills or strengths in methods of communication. So the different methods of communication, listening, on the telephone, whether you're texting, whether you're doing a short video, public speaking, in your resume, a letter, whatever it is, your LinkedIn profile. These are all ways of communicating with people, right? And it's a great way of finding out what communication skills you're good at and what communication skills you might need to work on. Because it's critically important that your communication skills be really great, really on point when you begin to tell the story of who you are, particularly when you begin to tell the story of who you are on social media. And today's social media, today's best platform for a professional is LinkedIn. It is by far the best professional social medium to use. It is also the place to be if you're looking for a job. Potential employers will almost certainly visit your LinkedIn page. They might also Google you, but more likely they will look at your LinkedIn page. So it needs to capture everything about you. I have a colleague who is in the process of creating a workshop on how to use LinkedIn for your job search. And I can't wait to see it and share it with you when it will be ready. In the meantime, I recommend you focus on the following things, some of which come from William Arruda's book, Digital-U. So understand the Digital-U. What is the impression you're making in the digital world? You can simply put your name in a Google search, for example, and see what comes up. Does this search represent who you are? Is it clear and consistent and on brand? So literally open a Google window and window tab and just type your name in and see what comes up. Also understand that LinkedIn acts as your personal recruiter. So just as if you were going to a recruitment agency or to a headhunter, your LinkedIn profile is going to advertise your strengths to readers. So you need to build a compelling profile. When you read the first couple of sentences in your About You section, do you feel compelled to read more? If not, that summary needs to change. I would also highly recommend that you spend money to have a professional photographer take a headshot of you. It is very, it really makes a difference when you're looking professional. It doesn't mean you have to wear a suit and tie, but it has to be a good quality photo. Think about what you want to use as an image in the header that's just above your picture, and whether or not you want to create a tagline that represents who you are and what you do. Also, I would post often. Comment often on other people's posts that you find interesting. Engage in conversations with them. Use pictures and videos wherever you can. And certainly use LinkedIn for networking and researching your area of interest. There are some common mistakes that people make when building a personal brand. For example, being too self-promotional. It's important to showcase your skills and experience, but it's also important to be humble and avoid coming across as arrogant or self-centered. Instead, focus on providing value to others and on building relationships. Provide value and build relationships. Not being authentic is a huge one. I can't repeat it often enough. People can tell when you're being insincere or inauthentic, and this can damage your reputation. So focus instead on being true to who you are as a person and communicate your values and strengths in a genuine way. Another common mistake is a lack of consistency. Your personal brand needs to be consistent across all channels and all platforms. As I said it before, your social media, your resume, any other materials that you use in your job search. This helps to reinforce the message and make it easier for people to remember you. Some people focus too much on aesthetics, and it's important to have a visually appealing brand, but concentrate more on something that is authentic, that differentiates you and makes you relevant to whoever it is you want to speak to. And the other thing is really not adapting to changes. We've said it before, I've said it here again earlier on. The world is changing, the job market is changing. Your personal brand also needs to evolve over time as your skills and your experience grow and as the job market changes. So be open to feedback and willing to adapt your personal brand as needed to stay relevant and competitive. So I've given you some examples of personal brands, explained what personal branding is and why it's important and why it's more relevant today than ever before. And we've talked at a high level about some of the things you can focus on to create and nourish your personal brand, including but not limited to how you show up on LinkedIn. I'd like to leave you with some key takeaways. Know yourself, your vision, your mission, your goals. Find out your why. Ask yourself, what kind of world would you like to live in? Then ask yourself, how does the work you do fit into that vision? Figure out what your goal is. I recently read somewhere, someone said, a goal is a dream without a deadline. Let yourself dream. Find your passion. Look inside and look outside. In other words, find out what people are saying about you. Does that correspond to who you are or who you want to be? And finally, again, recognize that the world is changing. So should your online presence. The four main things to look out for when building your personal brand are social media, right? This is what you need to focus on today. The changing nature of work, the importance, the absolute, undeniably first thing to look at is the importance of authenticity. And the last is the need to differentiate. So social media, the changing nature of work, you need to change with it, the importance of authenticity, and the need to differentiate. I know that the more complex the world becomes, the faster change happens, the more important it becomes to be able to stand out from the crowd. So let go of the script. Be yourself. Be authentic. Be real. Become a brand. Here's to your career reinvention. It's Danielle Silverman on Reinventing-U and helping you reinvent your career. Thank you for listening to Reinventing-U with me, your host, Danielle Silverman. Tune in on the second and fourth Monday each month at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific on transformationtalkradio.com. Join me and feel inspired and optimistic about your future. We only get one life, so embrace change and thrive with me. Find work that aligns best with your soul and what you enjoy. For more information, go to reinventingu.com.